call this work session to order. We'll start with attendance with you, Dean. Okay. Fred Dyson, Forrest Dunbar,
Dick Gray, Ira Herman, Pete Peterson, Eric Croft.
and on the phone,
John Weddleton.
great. Okay. Well, we were just handed to us, and is it an S version or is it some kind of?
It's a resolution.
Oh, I see. So it's a fundamentally different document.
Before, now you got it.
So who is going to initially present on this? Is it going to be you, Dean, or someone from the administration?
Certainly me.
I'm the best person to present, but I can sit
All right, let's start with Ira then.
Sure. Contextualizing, you may recall when you were kind of putting on the assembly, one of my three priorities was revitalization of downtown, making it ever better. And I won't repeat what I've said many times, but I've worked in downtown 30 years on every street from 1st to 7th. And I see these issues that are upon us that we need to address with even more diligence than we do now. I think this really Christopher's here, is our downtown representative. And Christopher and I worked up an ordinance, but what turned out to be an ordinance. We had some ideas of what we wanted to accomplish. With legal counsel advice, they suggested we go with an ordinance proposal. The administration said, well, let's take a look at what the most effective way to accomplish what we're all trying to accomplish, which is the engagement of all the major stakeholders in the downtown area to get to an action plan most expeditiously to be able to carry it forward. And long story short, that has resulted in what is now not an ordinance before you, but a resolution that would take the place of this representative coming up.
Okay. All right, Chris, you want to go or you want the administration?
Sure, I'm happy to go. Interestingly, in the process of the discussion, I had reviewed, since we got our packets, the Anchorage Steel resolution, and ironically, it contained almost all of the mechanisms that I had originally envisioned for this, which was kind of established by the Assembly and kind of operated in a way that was kind of orderly. But in lots of coordinated conversation with Mr. Schutte on this question, it seemed like there was a better way. And the better way actually has turned into something maybe even completely different than what we originally talked about. If you look at the title, it's the Downtown Anchorage Revitalization Leadership Council. It's kind of a mouthful. But effectively, it's a council of interested parties for the entire downtown, bounded by the creeks and Merrillfield and the inlet, that provides for a more broad conversation among the stakeholders to achieve the goals of the downtown. Heretofore, the entities that convene have been bounded only by the partnership's boundaries or the community council's boundaries or by various sub-elements of the whole downtown. And so this moves the conversation to a broader perspective and also more targeted. They took Ira and my word Renaissance out because they can only imagine men tilting with swords and women rowdily dancing at a Renaissance fair.
Not what the Renaissance was.
And instead, we were thinking of more classical definition, I think. But it's okay to concede to use the more average, milquetoast, generic word, revitalization, the more common term. So anyhow, that's kind of the shift that's happened. This does put the ball squarely into the administration's hands, but Mr. Schutte has a very long time commitment to the downtown that I recognize, and I'm willing to see it go that way.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Herman or Mr. Constant? Anybody on the phone? Okay. John, did you end up getting?
Question.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
A comment. One is, I don't see what you have against the Renaissance Fair. If you have downtown, you could probably be just confident.
No, nothing.
But what is the warehouse starting on line 35, the continued stagnation of the area from Main Creek to Chestnut Creek, Cook Inlet to Merrill
Yeah, I think I agree with that. Mr. Schutte?
Yeah, if I might, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this was actually a very easy project to work on because Assemblymembers Constant and Furman did such a great job with their original draft. In the whereas section, and I'm going to paraphrase the original AO, it was designed to catch your attention about the concerns that are facing downtown. And those concerns range from crime problems, drug problems, homelessness problems, disinvestment problems. And while the overall tone was designed to sort of draw your attention to those as a way of motivating and inspiring action, we, in this draft, we suggested that it be that you highlight some of the positives as well. However, some of those concerns still need to be recognized because those are legitimate everyday concerns that face these neighborhoods. And so I'm not, I don't think anybody's wed to the word stagnation, but I think the intent of that is to say that there are ongoing problems in these areas that should be spurring us to action. So whatever language members would propose in replacement should be fine as long as it conveys that sense of urgency, I think.
I'd say continued challenges or something like that. Stagnation.
Yeah. Any further thoughts on that? I mean, I tend to agree with John myself. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We could use a phrase something like an area that's ripe for redevelopment, or, just throwing a phrase out there.
Yeah, that's another one. Obviously, we can't do anything here tonight, although I guess, has this been already introduced onto the addendum?
I'll defer to Assembly Council on that.
Yes, I sent this to the addendum, so
Okay, so any changes we have to make will have to be done by amendment on Tuesday night. Is that right?
yes, that's right.
Okay.
Instead of posting consent agenda, or added posting consent agenda for consideration.
If we wanted to make those kind of amendments. Yeah, okay. Mr. Constant and Mr. Dyson.
You know, the word challenges is fair because I think stagnation might be inaccurate because it paints the picture that things aren't changing. And in fact, in a lot of parts of the downtown, things are getting worse. And so I think that the word challenges is actually more fair. So, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Dyson?
Yeah, thank you. I don't want to be spring-loaded on particular issues, but from my perspective, and I think Mr. Constance, a huge part of the problem is the location of homeless population, government and nonprofit organizations that serve that population are right near the downtown part of our city, and a significant part of that is the state has a huge part of the problem and the solution. So I want to be positive too, but if we solve that problem, so many of the other problems that affects the tourist industry, but also the commercial business industry, will be solved. So I'm just wondering are we kind of ducking what is the most visible and perhaps the most profound part of our problem? And I'm late to the game here, so.
Mr. Perman and Mr. Croft.
I recognize what you're saying 100%. And what I'd like to ask Mr. Schutte is talk about the constitution of membership of this activity. It might include key representation from the state to address
Absolutely, through the chair. While the resolution itself doesn't specify what the makeup would be of this body and what their true charge would be outside of revitalizing downtown, when we have spoken about this effort with the council members, Permanent Constant, and with various organizations that are already in those areas, including, for example, yesterday we briefed the board of the Downtown Partnership. Wednesday we briefed AEDC. So we've talked to others about it as well. The concerns that you raised are echoed by every one of those entities. So something that has become very clear is that this discussion around what are the things we need to be doing as a city to bring these neighborhoods, to move these neighborhoods forward. It's not simply going to be about sort of the pretty things that we want to see, buildings and improved sidewalks and roadways. It's about addressing the root causes of the problems that have affected those areas anyway. The social services, the social service providers, and that population are an integral part of that conversation. So whether that's inclusion of, for example, the mayor's homelessness coordinator, or other entities that aren't currently at the table or in the room, they absolutely positively have to be part of that conversation and should be.
Yeah, if I may continue.
Yes, but Mr. Croft is also.
Yeah, so.
Let him go. I was going to rebut what you're saying, so get further out on the limb.
So when Mr. Croft, Mr. Peterson, and I served in another venue, at the end of every resolution, a part of it was the distribution. And given my concern here, I would like to be, I'd like that problem to be more clear, but the distribution be to the state administration and the legislators and the responsible commissioners. And I would like for us to be able to, after when the legislature gets back in session, say this body acted definitively and hopefully as wisely as we need to do, but you guys have got to take very definitive action to solve the part of the problem and the part of the solution that is absolutely their venue. And most of you are smarter than me, and I hope you can come up with a magic way to do that. But anyways, that's my pretty strong feelings.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Mr. Croft and Mr. Constant.
Yeah, so I normally don't like pretending I've done action when I formed a commission, right? I normally don't like those things. I think all too often their recommendations, good or bad, are ignored and the effort is wasted. Sometimes it works very well, but often it doesn't, and it's frustrating. And I think this has the potential to work very well. I guess the difference I want to point out, Fred, is the problem of downtown is not just Beans and Brother Francis. That's a big part of it. Every big city has big city problems, or the biggest city was out for a while. And the 4th Avenue Theater is vacant, and the transit center needs a rewrite, and so it's a big part. And I've heard about it, and I understand we have to figure that out. But making this into where does Beans go? And if you moved it tomorrow, it would help a lot of problems there, and it cause a lot of problems in some other portion of town. But this whole thing doesn't come down to that. And I think if we see it that way, we're doing an injustice to the whole gamut of big city problems we're starting to have. An important part of it, and I don't want this commission to be the way we avoid talking about that, but there's all kinds of other aspects.
So, Mr. Constant and Mr. Peterson, Mr. Trainee.
So, just to really be clear about the language now, it's not a commission, and there is a general consensus that our boards and commissions are in need of their own revitalization, and that might in fact be underway. Right? Renaissance, exactly. And so, just separating our thinking from that very concrete way of organizing an order, which took me a little bit to, resistance and conversation to get past. This is instead literally creating a leadership council for the downtown, right? This is empowering and requesting the mayor's team to convene consistently until such a time that there is a sense that things are working, to move the question forward about, number one, what is the vision for our downtown? Right, we have the comprehensive plan. It's old, but and some of the planks of it are still very vital, but it's kind of being ignored. So this provides a venue for the various stakeholders to say, well, let's focus on this. The other problems, homelessness is one of them, and the associated crime that comes with either those individuals or the people that prey on them. There is one of the most difficult issues, road policy. If you contemplate what's happening in the neighborhood from Merrillfield to the inlet, from roads, you have the Glen to Seward connection, you have these double one-way couplets cutting through the downtown, you have stakeholders that have been saying for years, let's figure out a better plan. You have $100 million of lighting investment. Right? The infrastructure in downtown is falling apart. There's a lighting plan, $100 million to replace the lights. We're never going to do that. I mean, that is so much worth of money. But what is the plan for the lighting? Vacancies are everywhere. The 4th Avenue Theater is a great example. So it's all of these problems together, plus all of the hopes and dreams and hard work of the committed people who are doing the work around the table. What do we want to be when we grow up? So just keep in mind that this isn't a stodgy old board and commission. This is empowering the mayor and asking the mayor's team to really pull together all of the key players in the downtown, and some that are out of the downtown but who are engaged. And I do like the idea of, if we have a friendly administration, asking the chief of staff to sit on this council, because their offices are right here. And so, the state could be part of the conversation, and it's very interesting. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Peterson and Mr. Trainee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When I first saw the title to this here 10 days ago or so, the first thing that came to my mind is that this was a 4th Avenue Theater Renaissance Commission, basically. And I'm glad that it's actually not entirely that. Not saying that renovating the theater is a bad idea. We were hoping a few years ago that private development was going to take place to revitalize that thing, and that unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, didn't work out. And but there is definitely a need for a renaissance in downtown. I just had a visitor here for the first time, never been to Anchorage or Alaska before, and so I was trying to get some feedback from him since I've been here for a long time. Some fresh eyes might see some things a little bit differently. But what he told me, and he's from Peoria, Illinois, and been to Chicago a lot, and he said, I see homeless people. He was staying at the Puffin Inn in beautiful downtown Spenard, and when he would go for a walk in the morning, he wanted to walk over by Lake Hood, and he would run into what he called potential homeless gentlemen, and he said it reminded him of a part of Chicago where when he would walk in an area downtown, he would see similar people that were in similar circumstances. So I know it doesn't help solve the problem, but this is not an isolated deal. I mean, it's, major cities all over the country, probably all over the world, have got challenges with homeless people and areas of their city that are ripe for redevelopment. But we did pass some tax incentives a couple of years ago for areas of town that could be revitalized, and we delayed some taxes for 10 years and hopefully get some investments from some private entities. So, I think the superstructure, so to speak, is there. We just have to come up with a plan that people would agree on that we could use the financing for.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Trainee, and then I'll put myself in the queue.
Chris, I liked your AO. I don't like your AR. Quite frankly, mayors come and mayors go. And we've had some good mayors, some not so good mayors, depends on point of view. But an AO keeps it in front of us. An AR, depends who the mayor is, it can be, they'll pay attention or there's something going on. Quite frankly, your midtown is moving to, your downtown is moving to midtown. And that's happened in a lot of cities where that happens, but it is moving there. And I'd like to revitalize this downtown because I see this homeless problem all over Anchorage. I went to Arby's last night in your area, and there was a guy walking up to, you order your food, wearing a mattress on his back and a hood over himself.
Huh.
So they're everywhere in this town, not just downtown. but I would really rather you went with an AO than an AR. My impression. I don't know
Anyone
what you
respond to
call
that?
it. Call it revitalization or call it whatever you want.
Reconstruction.
Yeah, so, yeah, reconstruction.
The problem of the boards and commissions not being fully manned is a problem of this administration. They need to address it.
And I would say, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair, that is, I understand that perspective, and it may be sometime in the not too distant future that question comes back again, but in the initial conception, when we started this conversation, we thought 12 months to 18 months. That this was a time-limited, let's bring together people to really focus on the question and come up with some thoughts that are driven by reality and by opportunities and et cetera, but not to create an ongoing kind of like a regular board and commission. So, but then we were kind of guided to the point where the AO was created, but the theory really wasn't to make a permanent structure, but instead to have a short-term but really deep conversation and see what we can do. Because again, there are dozens of different plans impacting this area, things that have been crafted by the Title 21 working groups and by all the various stakeholder groups. But we just need to bring them back up and ask ourselves, where are we going?
And sometimes you have to invite private enterprise to develop the town or redevelopment. For example, the Fang family.
Well, and just
They actually tore that ugly building down for Northern Lights.
Right.
They did exactly what they said they were going to do. But the problem was when they came to the first time to the theater, you had stop after stop put on. Depends on your point of view.
No, so just on that note, I was going to respond to Mr. Peterson that in fact yesterday I had an encounter with the whole Beach Investment Group and their consultants all at the elevator right here with a stack of papers thicker than that going up to the 8th floor. And so I would suggest that those efforts aren't vanquished, they are ongoing. And so the conversation is not done. And in fact, I don't know, I haven't seen the plans, but I would speak to the fact that that's another sign of hope that there is still the possibility the grass will grow. So that just
The process we created required chief fiscal officer to be involved in it, and he wasn't. Now he's going to be gone, so you'd have to, we're really going to put in that position, we'll have to be re-educated.
We've got Renaissance, we've got re-education, all kinds of historical reconstruction. So I'm going to speak and then we'll go to Mr. Dyson. So I kind of want to, just because we've got some time, so we might as well have a conversation since we're all sitting in this room. I've got 2 points here. One, I really appreciate, I like that you went to an AR instead of an AO because it was what you worked out with the administration, and I appreciate that you worked with them. I was at a meeting with the Anchorage Economic Development, is it corporation? Corporation, a couple days ago with Mr. Schutte, and Mr. Schutte was getting raked over the coals because the administration hadn't sort of finished this particular document or reviewed this document. And as Mr. Schutte explained, it was just a matter of not just priorities, but just staff time. Like, there's only so many hours in the day, and they're pulling them in one direction, somebody else is pulling them in the other. And so I think it's good that we're cognizant of that and work within the human limitations of an administration that is a certain number of people with a certain number of hours in the day. And I think this indicates that to a certain degree. The second thing I wanted to say, and this is more just a question or a challenge to my colleagues, like, we keep conflating redevelopment and sort of solving the homeless issue. And I agree that it's a portion of it, but if you look at some of the fastest growing, most prosperous cities in the country right now, Seattle, San Francisco, for example, the East Bay in Oakland, Portland, they have simultaneously, quote unquote, redeveloped their downtowns and have, tons of cranes and tons of building and all the kind of redevelopment we want to see in places like Peach, that redevelopment. At the same time, their homelessness is increasing. So, I'm not sure if we have to make a choice or if we can just try to work on both. But I want to see a revitalization of Fourth Avenue Theater in that area. I'd also really like to see something done about the giant surface parking lots we have that are not well suited for any downtown. But also being cognizant that that's different, and even for example, turning the 5th and 6th into two-way streets, which I think a lot of urban planners think is really necessary to have a walkable, vibrant feeling downtown. That won't magically solve the homelessness crisis, nor will solving the homelessness crisis necessarily lead to a bunch of new redevelopment if you don't do something to deal with the surface parking and the poorly constructed roads and everything else. So it's it's two parallel and perhaps interrelated tracks. Mr. Dyson and then Mr. Constant.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So when I sat in one of these chairs 30 years ago, my colleagues and the mayor went for the convention center, Sullivan Arena, bike trail, all those kind of things. And given my wiring diagram, I couldn't see it. And that was genius. And it has made this downtown area competitive as a national convention site. And I hats off to those people with that vision. And I like lots of the things down here, the pedestrian amenities and the whole thing. And they have made this a really generally pleasant place for it. And I grew up in Seattle, spent a lot of time in Portland, my wife's from San Francisco, been there a lot. And our heart of our town is far more concentrated in all those places. It'll always be that way, and so our problems are related but different. And forgive my ignorance again, but does the 2040 plan include the development of the Ship Creek area?
Through the chair, the land use plan update, the 2040 plan you just referenced covers the entire municipality.
Yeah, so
it does include Ship Creek.
Yeah, so most of us have been around and seen downtown, the port area of Seattle, certainly in San Francisco, the Riverwalk in San Antonio, all those things have taken, and Juneau, believe it or not, have taken commercial buildings, warehouses, made them an absolute delightful place for everybody to go. And that whole area down there is way underdeveloped, both the port and the railroad. And I can't believe the time that's gone by. But the railroad actually believed that their reclassification, consolidation, when they put trains together, going, could be better done virtually, than here. And there's got to be a whole lot better uses for that Ship Creek place out there than for shuffling railroad cars around, and so on. But what a magnificent long-term asset we have, for both tourist-related things, but all kinds of destination-related things, and some businesses that would fit there. Maybe some of you snot-nosed kids, younger people will live to see it happen. I won't. But I can't imagine that shouldn't be a part of our long-term plan. Absolutely. And as you probably know better than all of us, Chris, the transportation in and out of there, that means truck routes. To get those, we got thousands of connexes come in here and got to go on trucks at the railroad, and so on. But all that's got to be a part of a long-range plan. And I'm a great fan of history, and believe it or not, in our 100 years, we still got a little. On Government Hill, and a few of the houses are scattered around, and trying to preserve that. Look at the couple of buildings downtown here that we make a big fuss out of rightly, So, I'm sorry, I'm preaching.
Yep.
But we need to have a long-term, doggone it, we got to solve these problems here. The homeless issue and the panhandlers, at times, is a restriction on some of the tourist industry. And, and there's,
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Mr. Constant.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And the homeless issue as an example, or the street trouble, the crimes and whatnot, are a factor in people moving their businesses to Midtown from downtown. It's all connected. In the original AO, we didn't list out all the problems. We had 2 pages of problems, 2 pages of potential players, and 2 pages of potential outcomes. We didn't drive that because what we're hopeful is that the individuals who come with fresh, clean perspective and are representative of their areas in the downtown will bring that to the table, and it will be theirs. And to speak to the idea of the plans are actually what really crystallized this question for me. So we have the downtown comprehensive plan. We have the 2040 land use plan. We have the Ship Creek plan. We have the Fairview Neighborhood plan. We have the Freight Mobility plan. We have all of these incredibly complex documents under our land use system, but there's nobody having a talk about how all those plans work together. And so that's the next step of this conversation, is to bring the people who are working and living, trying to improve, to have a conversation about what is the most important way to unify all of these parts into a vision. And so I would agree with everything you said,
All right.
and let's drive forward.
May I respond?
Sure, and then Mr. Trainee?
Yeah. It's wonderful. Mr. Croft is remarkably insightful. He is right that resolutions can be a catalyst to make happen. It's, in my memory, which is fairly wrong, extensively rare. And I agree with Mr. Trainee. I wish there was a way to put teeth in this thing, you know, and yeah, not only demanding results, i.e. pieces of paper with reports on them, but encouraging or coercing progress. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Mr. Trainee?
Greg, do you remember when Tom Fink was mayor, the plan was given to us to develop Ship Creek, they were going to put maritime, an aquarium down there that you could walk through.
Oh, that would be awesome.
That was a plan.
I want an
The
aquarium.
problem was it's all predicated upon income coming in. And the state ran into a big problem when we had to plan oil revenue. A lot of these problems we have shelves of plans. Without money, that's not going to happen. We've got to figure out how we can revitalize our port and make sure it's stable. Those other dreams we had during that era were fun to look at, but never came to fruition.
Now I'm
I mean, this one
disappointed.
time they had you walk through this aquarium. It would be a tourist attraction for everybody to come to
They
it.
put in
It
sewage.
just never happened.
Well, yeah, I mean, go ahead, Mr. Beers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And sometime in the last 3 or 4 years, the Assembly has seen a presentation for a redevelopment of Ship Creek. And I don't know if that project has officially started yet. Yeah, but that means the artist renderings were beautiful. And so maybe we've taken that first baby step in that direction. And I think once something like that gets started and opens, then you see other business people deciding maybe, you know, that they'll wade in a little bit, you know. And so, I mean, obviously, we don't have unlimited wherewithal to do that ourselves as a municipality, but, you know, with the continued increasing tourism we have, I think there may be some private entities that would see an opportunity there.
Mr. Schutte, you want to say something?
Yeah, thank you. Just first to close out on the conversation about Ship Creek and frankly all the neighborhoods that are referenced here. There's a lot of exciting things that have been planned. There's a lot of exciting things that are actually happening. Ship Creek, as you pointed out, we have some of the first residential development in the downtown area happening in Ship Creek. So we're very excited about that. The railroad's a very vibrant partner in that area. They already are moving on to the next phase of that sort of master plan that they laid out for us, the downtown rail. That's the name of the whole
Downtown
area.
Edge.
Edge is the housing, rail is like the master plan. Anyway, they're moving ahead on their next phase of a mixed-use development. We as a city have completed several projects in the area, including the Ship Creek Trail, which is probably one of the most underutilized hidden gems of the city. King's Landing, which recently opened, and next phase is to make that missing connection between the Coastal Trail and the Ship Creek Trail to have a full network.
We supposed to increase security with some cameras.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, to back up to the greater point, though, which I really appreciate Assemblymember Dyson about action following resolutions. We tried to put in here steps in the resolve clause that at least give you a sense of the expectations, or I guess from you to us, what your expectations are of this council. And one of those is to report back to the assembly frequently on what they are doing and what else they need to do. So If there's ways to further enhance that language to make it better, we'd be open to that. But I do want everyone to know that we share the same concern as Assemblymember Dyson, and we thought we need to at least put in here some expectations of progress and reporting. Thank you.
Mr. Constant and Mr. Perman, Mr. Train.
So I think that we contemplated an AM to go with this that would detail out what's kind of in the AO in terms of who, why, and how. That would be more specific, and so that still may be forthcoming, but I don't know at this time. I don't know that it's necessary, because at this time, I think there's a pretty clear consensus. And as to the point of teeth, there's one change that Mr. Schutte might not have noticed that I asked Mr. Gates to make, and that is one line that states that also shall, the downtown representatives, line 41, shall be a member. And so I will be the teeth, at least until I'm no longer graced with an opportunity to represent my neighborhood. And I think that no one would doubt that I am willing and capable of ensuring that there's progress made on this question. And so,
Well, I had actually hoped that more than one assembly member might be able to sit on this. You certainly should, but there might be one or two other people who have the bandwidth and might want to join, but no more than three.
right.
All right. We have Mr. Trainee in the queue, then Mr. Perman, then Mr. Schutte.
Chris, if you want the AR, I'll vote with you on it, okay?
I do.
However, I'm going off the body next year. I want to make sure you follow this. I want to come back in 3 years and find this didn't go anywhere.
No,
It's
it's
kind of
going
like,
somewhere.
we've had so many of these projects. For example, we have a power generation plant on Sheep Creek. There was a big plan to turn that into a huge development, and that is still a vacant building, unless they've been working on it.
They got a paint
It's
job.
not vacant, it got sold.
And it got a paint job.
Yeah.
Well, that's an improvement over the 40 years it's been sitting there. I'm just telling you, there's all these programs, but they all depend upon money.
You know, the rail, excuse me, is realigning. There's a project to realign the trail. There are new tenants moving into the Sheep Creek Basin that I'm not really privileged to talk about, but just know there's a lot going on that is real towards achieving this. In fact, it's more investment than I've seen in many years. And so I think it's happening. This just creates a tool for us to have a broader conversation with the leadership.
That also speaks to John Weddleton's point then. I mean, it's not stagnating. Sheep Creek is not stagnating.
You know, I think that changing that word is fair, because stagnation implies static. And it is not static. In some areas it's moving forward, and in some areas it's moving backwards. And that backwards area, it needs attention.
Mr. Perman?
This has been a great conversation. I'm picking up all these visionary ideas, things for the future. We might even think about having a railroad represented on this body. You know, I'm not an expert on what it takes to make a downtown get from good to the best. But the reason I like the idea of the resolution was the ordinance seemed to take, it looked like a fairly drawn out process, fairly cumbersome to deal with. And what sold me on the resolution was the conversation I had with the mayor at the Spenard Road, put your hands in the concrete event. And the mayor came over to me and says, so what's with this ordinance about this downtown thing? You know, what am I, top limit? And he said, I already have the power to do this. I said, well, get on with it. And it led to a conversation where I learned the most important thing is this administration is absolutely committed in its second term to moving this forward. It is a major, major plank of their effort. And I'm convinced of that, and I can see the action on that. And the time frame that we're talking with the administration, it was the tenure of the administration, a couple of years, well with, you know, it's plenty of span to make this happen. So I'm happy that we're gonna see some good things come out of this. So it's very important to have the administration, the mayor's power, and I can absolutely see it.
Thank you, Mr. Perman. Mr. Schutte and Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, thank you. So when we shared this resolution with a lot of the community partners that we anticipate will be part of the effort, there was a lot of support for it. In fact, it was universal. And one of the reasons that support was universal is that each of those entities, as Assemblymember Constant's well aware, in the past have become very siloed in the work that they do. even narrowly focused in a particular region or part of the city. Fairview is focused on Fairview, South Edition is focused on South Edition, Downtown Partnership on downtown. And there has not been this overarching leadership group, council, whatever word you choose, that can serve as a venue for everyone to remain aware of each other's plans, people to share opportunities where partnerships are needed and make sense, and for people to actually offer to lend a hand when they have the capacity to help participate in another group's efforts. So I think that there was a lot of forethought that went into the original ordinance and into this AR from both Assembly members Perman and Constant that captures that, and the entities that are actually doing a lot of the day-to-day work saw that and really appreciate the avenue for participating in that. So I just wanted to add that component to it as well.
Thank you, Mr. Schutte. Mr. Dyson, and then Mr. Trainee, and Mr. Constant.
So, this is a helpful conversation, as somebody had said. If you got a minute afterwards, I'd like you to tell me about what can be done with the old 80 hospital site.
Oh, there's a plan.
It's geologically unstable. That could be injured around. Mr. Trainee, if you have an idea on what we could do and what we'd accomplish by making an ordinance out of that, I'd be glad to hear it. When I had a recalcitrant attorney general at the state who said, well, if the legislature really meant what they said, they would have put a penalty in for our non-compliance. I rewrote the bill and put his PCN in there, which I couldn't get out of committee.
Good. Is it Mr. Constant or Mr. Trainee? Mr. Trainee and Mr. Constant.
On page 2, section 1, would you add a number 6 in there? Require yearly update from the administration on actions taken by this resolution. I just want you, Chris, I don't want this somebody to forget because we have new members coming on, old members leaving. I don't want this to be a flash in the pan. I want them to have to report yearly so you know what the status is, Chris. I know you're eager to be where you'll be, but you may leave office next time. You never know. I just want this to come back to the Sunday's memory. We're not trying to re-educate people.
Mr. Constant, and then I want to wrap up a little bit and talk about logistics very quickly, but go ahead.
Yeah, so one of the most interesting parts of this process, when Ira and I released the draft ordinance, the reaction was swift, and every one of the organizations that you would imagine would be part of this were like, wait a minute, that's what we already do. Right? That's what we do. The Downtown Partnership, they're like, wait a minute, that's our job. The Downtown Council, wait a minute, that's what we do. All these various entities were like, wait a minute. And so just by the very act of introducing this thing, we shocked people into awareness of a missing opportunity. And that is to join forces broadly. And so that's what the broad hope of this is to do. And yeah.
Following up on that,
Herman.
and that was somewhat upsetting to some of those groups who had been consulted, and I'll take a lot of them. You think Christopher's got a short fuse? I got 5 days. What's happened since, now that this resolution is in the works, the mayor's office has been engaged, all those groups have completely turned around and said, this is a great idea, we want to be part of this, we want to work on it together cooperatively. I think it's fabulous.
Thank you, Mr. Perman. So before we wrap up here, I just want to talk. It sounds like there is one small, relatively non-controversial change on line 33, and perhaps another one on line 4 of page 2, where you could say something like at least yearly, or however you want to structure it. I'm working off the resolution up here. So could we do that in one amendment? Do you think? If there's people aren't opposed to it, perhaps the sponsors could draft and before that amendment? Is that something we could do?
I think Mr. Gates could do that.
I think Mr. Weddleton is the great amender of our body.
Mr. Weddleton's got plenty of amendments going forward. Great amender. Are you still there, Mr. Weddleton?
I'm still here, and I've embellished my thinking on the amendment.
Okay. You're taking the Max Grunberg role? Are you going to do a significant amendment?
So I think just get rid of stagnation, and I'm thinking could address the challenges and opportunities of the area.
Okay.
I like it.
So now the question, who is actually going to put forward the amendment? Mr. Perman. Great, perfect.
You just have 5 days left. Yeah. Yeah.
4, but who's counting?
4, yes.
Mr. Gates.
Sorry, I was frequency of updates, did you say annual?
I don't know if we actually want to go for that. That was Mr. Trainey's
I
suggestion.
would like to see something that requires yearly update. I don't want the body to forget about this. We had a good representative for downtown, many of Alan Cheshire. Nobody pushed downtown like Alan Cheshire did. And now we've got Chris. I just want to make sure we don't have a period of stagnation if something happens to you, Chris, okay?
Okay, all right. With
You got it.
any other final comments? Okay. This work session is closed.